a bruised and breathless Elizabeth George collapses onto the cold stone floor of a darkened cathedral, her sapphire dress fanning out like a pool of ink, unaware that the powerful Duke William Bush is watching from the shadows. Before we continue, if this story has already drawn you in, I invite you to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. It allows these quiet Victorian tales to reach others who value depth and timeless storytelling. And if you're willing, do leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. It is always a pleasure to see how far these stories travel. The story opens within the cavernous, Gothic interior of a cathedral where the only light filters through a massive, ornate rose window. The silence is shattered by Elizabeth's frantic entry as she seeks sanctuary from Michael Bryan's control. This desperate act introduces the central conflict, a woman's fight for survival against a husband who views her as property. Duke William, initially a silent observer of her whirlwind of emotions, steps forward to intervene, captivated by her fierce will to live despite her terror. The cold stone of the pillar offered little comfort as Elizabeth's knees buckled. In the heavy silence of the nave, a floorboard creaked, not the aggressive stomp of Michael, but a measured, rhythmic stride. From the velvet gloom stepped Duke William Bush, his tall silhouette cutting through the dust motes like a blade. Elizabeth gasped, her hands flying to her bruised cheek, the sting of shame sharper than the physical pain. To be seen like this, broken and breathless, by the most formidable man in the realm was a terror of its own. Yet, William did not look upon her with the expected disdain. Instead, his piercing gaze held a strange, resonant gravity, a silent acknowledgment of the war she was fighting within the hollows of her own life. Sanctuary is a fragile thing, Elizabeth, William spoke, his voice a low resonance that seemed to steady the very air. He reached out, not to touch, but to offer a path. He promised her the safety of his sprawling estate, a fortress where Michael's reach could not extend. But his eyes held a warning: freedom comes with its own burdens. You will no longer be a victim, but you must become a strategist. Elizabeth looked at the sapphire silk of her torn dress and then into the Duke's unyielding eyes. In that moment, a desperate alliance was forged. She would accept his protection, knowing that to step into his world meant leaving the girl she used to be behind forever. The heavy iron gates of the Duke's manor groaned under the weight of Michael Bryan's fury. He stood there, his face contorted with the entitlement of a man who believed his wife was a piece of property to be retrieved. "Give her back," he roared, his voice echoing against the stone. William stepped onto the veranda, his composure a chilling contrast to Michael's heat. With a flick of his wrist, he signaled the guards to remain still. "Lord Bryan, you are trespassing on Crown-granted land," the Duke stated, his tone devoid of emotion. His presence was an immovable mountain, and Michael, sensing the shift in power, could only snarl in frustration before retreating into the shadows of the driveway. In the quiet hours that followed, the Duke sat with Elizabeth in the library. He spoke of his own life, not of titles and gold, but of the crushing weight of familial obligations that had nearly extinguished his own spirit. "We are both prisoners of names we did not choose," he confessed. This shared understanding bridged the gap between their stations. Elizabeth realized that William wasn't just a protector, he was a mirror. For the first time since her wedding day, the ice around her heart began to thaw, replaced by a flickering warmth that wasn't born of fear, but of a mutual recognition of the scars they both carried beneath their fine clothes. With the help of William's most trusted staff, the work of liberation began in earnest. Elizabeth spent hours poring over ledgers and intercepted letters brought to her by the Duke's agents. The truth was far uglier than she had imagined. Michael wasn't just a monster, he was a failure. She uncovered evidence of his total financial ruin and the vile schemes he had concocted to sell off her dowry lands to pay his gambling debts. Every document she read was a brick removed from the wall of his power. She was no longer just a woman in hiding, she was an architect of his downfall, gathering the ammunition needed to blow his world apart. The night of the grand winter gala arrived, and Elizabeth did not hide. She stepped into the ballroom wearing a gown of midnight blue that fit her like armor, her spine as straight as a soldier's. Beside her, William moved with the grace of a predator, his presence a silent challenge to any who dared whisper. Michael was there, his eyes widening as he saw his fleeing wife standing at the center of the room, radiant and unafraid. He expected a broken woman, instead, he found a queen. Elizabeth felt the weight of every gaze in the room, but she did not falter. Her dress was no longer a pool of ink to drown in, but a banner of her defiance. If this story has captured your interest, please like the video and subscribe for more. Michael finally cornered her in a secluded alcove, his breath smelling of sour wine. "You think a duke can protect you from the law of a husband? I will drag your name through the mud," he hissed, his hand reaching for her arm. But Elizabeth did not flinch. She met his gaze with a newfound courage that made him hesitate. "The only name being dragged through the mud tonight, Michael, is yours. I know about the debts. I know about the fraud." Her voice was soft, but it carried the killing edge of a blade. The power dynamic that had defined her marriage for years shattered in an instant, leaving him grasping at shadows. Before Michael could strike, the Duke's shadow fell over them. William stepped between them, his formidable frame acting as a physical shield. "The lady has spoken," William declared, his voice carrying to the nearby guests. "She is a woman of her own making, and she is under the protection of this house." The ballroom went silent as the eyes of the ton witnessed the public downfall of Michael Bryan. Exposed as a fraud and a coward, Michael shrunk back, the social noose tightening around his neck. Elizabeth stood tall behind William, her heart hammering not with fear, but with the exhilarating realization that she was finally, irrevocably free. As the orchestra began a sweeping melody, William turned to her and offered his hand. This was not the desperate flight of the cathedral, but a deliberate choice. "Would you care to dance, Elizabeth?" he asked, his eyes softening for her alone. Freed from the noose of her past, she placed her hand in his. They moved across the floor in their first real waltz, two souls who had found sanctuary in each other's shadows. Elizabeth knew the path ahead would be uncharted and the scandal would be great, but as she looked at William, she knew she wasn't a refugee anymore. She was a partner, ready to dance into a future they would write together. If this tale has stirred your curiosity, a simple like and subscription is most appreciated. And if you wish, share in the comments where you are listening from. Thank you.